All right. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. My name's Katie Bradford. I'm the program manager for Water Action Volunteers. And my co-host today is Emily Heald. She's the Rivers educator for WAVE in there. And we both work with UW Extension. We're based in Madison, but we support partners and volunteers all over Wisconsin. And today is a deep dive into the WAV Habitat Assessment. So I wanted to start with a little background on it first. And its evolution. First of all, with Zoom, at the bottom here, it's showing our toolbar in Zoom, so you know where the different features are. We ask that you stay muted unless you'd like to speak, just to avoid background noises. So you'll be muted if there's that red slash over the microphone icon. And then if you'd like to post questions or share comments in the chat, you're welcome to do so at any time, and I'll see those as they come in and I can react to them in the moment. I'll be taking questions throughout. So that's the chat icon in the middle. And then if you want to leave the meeting, there is, you click end. I think it looks that way for you. You can leave at any time. And I'll be sharing the slides and the PowerPoint at the end of the talk to all of your emails. So to start, why do we want to do a stream habitat assessment? So the WAVE method is useful as a kind of baseline stream habitat screening tool. It can help us identify stressors for fish and beneficial habitat features for fish along a length of the stream. It can help us identify priority areas for management or restoration along the stream corridor, and also indicate how watershed land uses could be impacting the stream corridor. And then lastly, what I've heard from volunteers that we've trained is they just learn a ton about fish habitat and stream ecosystems by doing this. Because as you can imagine, if you're doing baseline or nutrient monitoring, you're visiting one spot every month. But a stream habitat, you're walking up to potentially 1,000 feet of your stream, and you're really getting to know large reaches, long reaches of your stream. We've been doing WAVE habitat assessments using generally this method since 2015. Every triangle on this map is a stream habitat assessment that is completed in the last since 2015. So there's definitely parts of the state where they're very concentrated and parts where we don't have any stream habitat data from WAVE volunteers. And on the right is a simple chart showing final ratings of stream habitat completed by WAVE volunteers. And as you can see, a lot of the streams that volunteers are assessing are rated as fair or good. And then there's just a small handful that volunteers are rating as poor and a handful that they're rating as excellent. This does not mean that this is the quality of stream habitat in our state. This is a sampling bias. So it's possible that volunteers are sampling streams that are fair or good for stream habitat, and they're not hitting up those super poor or super excellent streams. So we don't really know, but that's not really the intent of me sharing this data anyway. Just wanted to give you a sample. So to start off, I've been working with DNR stream biologists over the last year or two in order to do a review of our method. It's been 8 years since we started doing this, and we never really did an in-depth review of how it's going, whether we're following a method that makes sense for DNR biologists to use that data, and kind of looking into training volunteers, what makes sense for volunteers to be doing with a habitat assessment. And ultimately what they told me was that it's super useful getting this screening level volunteer habitat assessment for streams. Often there's not other data available on a stream. And so it's really useful for the biologist to have this information. But this type of habitat assessment is an advanced what I consider a level 2 monitoring method. It requires its own 3-hour field training. It's a lot of content to learn, so it really is separate from baseline monitoring. It's separate from nutrient monitoring. It's an entirely different assessment method that you're learning. So we're separating out, I think in the past it used to be combined with baseline, but baseline trainings already take almost 4 hours. So we're separating it out completely so we can do it right. I also don't recommend it for first-time WAVE volunteers because there's a lot of new content to learn and it can be physically challenging. It's not for everyone. Whereas baseline monitoring, really anyone can participate, whether they're in the water or on shore. But habitat assessments require you to wade in the stream a long distance, which can, you have to be physically comfortable with uneven surfaces, and you have to be comfortable wading long distances in a stream. So I want to just preface with that because I know in the past it's kind of been mixed with baseline, and from now on in the future we're separating it out completely and really communicating to volunteers ahead of time that this is an advanced in-depth method that we think they'll love and enjoy, but just know what you're getting into. So the method is based on the DNR's Wadable Stream Qualitative Fish Habitat Assessment for streams that are less than or equal to 33 feet wide. There is a version of this where that is for streams wider than 33 feet, but since that protocol is completely different and our program focuses on wadable streams, this should only be done on streams 33 feet wide or narrower that are wadable. So it's not for every stream situation. So this is what we're rating when we're doing our stream walk. There are 7 habitat features or parameters, which I'm going to walk through in this training today. And each of them have a rating from poor to excellent, poor, fair, good, or excellent. And ultimately what you're going to end up with is a single number, 0, 5, 10, or 15 typically for each habitat parameter. And then you just add those up and you get your final score. And then biologists can look at this and they can say, oh, well, the total score is, this is a good stream habitat, but maybe we're weak. This length of stream has a, not as great, doesn't rate as well in fine sediments. So there's a lot of fine sediments in the stream, but it's doing really well in terms of providing cover for fish. So streams are diverse and they provide different habitat features for fish and macroinvertebrates. And then this is great for baseline comparisons as well. So you can do this every few years and over time you'll see if the stream is pretty consistent in its habitat quality or if it's changing. So planning for your habitat assessment. I just this year put together a training guide using that review insight and working with DNR biologists because our old fact sheet didn't provide methods information. It just provided background on stream habitat. So the training guide goes more in depth on how to do a habitat assessment, and that's available on our website on our methods page. And I have that link there, and maybe Emily can find it on our website and drop it in the chat for you guys. I also wanted to briefly cover stream access laws and rights, since you will, by doing this, be wading a fair distance along your stream, and you may have public or private property on the different stream banks. So navigable streams are public waters, but you have to keep your feet wet. So if the stream bank is private property, you're not allowed to step onto the stream bank without the permission of the landowner. The exception to that is if you need to get around an obstruction like deep water, if you're wading, or if there are trees across the stream that you need to briefly get around. You are legally allowed to exit the stream, walk on the private property, and get back in. If you're curious if the stream length you will likely be assessing is private or public, you can use the DNR Public Lands Access Map and check about public land ownership. But it's not a requirement that you're only assessing streams that have public land ownership. If it's private, it's always best practice to potentially leave a note with the private landowner on that side. Maybe they have a mailbox. If you're comfortable doing that, usually people are really excited to hear from, oh, hey, there's a volunteer assessing the stream water quality. That's great. Maybe they'll want to know what you find. So safety is also a really big, important piece to a habitat assessment because you're wading long distances in the stream. So stop the assessment immediately if you encounter any conditions that feel unsafe, or if there are strong or high flows in the stream, don't do a habitat assessment. And again, we're only doing it for streams that are less than 33 feet wide. Definitely no big rivers. These are wadable, smaller streams. Always bring a partner with you. This is honestly impossible to do without a partner because you're taking some measurements, but it's also for safety. Bring at least one other person with you. And then during your stream walk, just know you may encounter mucky stream bottoms, which are hard to wade through because they create suction on your boots or waders. And the muck can be super deep too. So be safe there. You don't want to get stuck. Pools can be deep. So that's something you can use your net to see what's in front of you, and wear polarized glasses so that you can see the stream bottom as well. You may encounter down trees like in the picture here that you need to adventure through. And of course, you may encounter beaver dams or other small dams. So a stream walk is an adventure. And as long as you're up for that and you have a partner and you guys are being safe and looking out for each other, you're going to have a good time. For the materials that you need, you just bring whatever, what you have for your baseline monitoring is everything you need. So hip boots or waders, you will need your DNet labeled in decimal feet or tenths of feet, and then you will need your measuring tape reel labeled in feet too. And then apart from that, just your clipboard with your data sheets, pen, pencil, and you can either bring a calculator or your phone, or you can do that calculations on shore later. And the two data sheets that we're going to use are the DNR form I showed earlier, the data sheet with the habitat parameters. And then I also created a transect worksheet where you're going to go through your stream reach and assess each of the habitat parameters. So timing, this is a little updated after doing this review with DNR biologists. This is not something you need to do every year unless your stream is dramatically changing every year because it has really strong flashy flows, which you might see more in urban areas. So generally every other year is fine. You can complete it any time between May 15th and September 15th, ideally in summer, but the biologists do their habitat assessments anytime during the May 15 to September 15 window. It's planned for 2 to 3 hours. It takes time to do the stream walk. So keep that in mind. You're going to need an afternoon or a morning, and wider streams will require you to walk longer distances. So if you have a really narrow stream, it won't take you as long as if you have a really wide stream. And then in terms of what conditions, I've had this question before. You want to aim to do this during the baseline or the typical stream flow conditions for that time of year you're monitoring. So you don't want to do it on a dry stream because then fish can't live there. So there's no point. And you don't want to do it when the stream is super flooded, like right after a storm, because that stream flow is going to start coming back to its baseline level. And that's what the fish are living in usually, is that baseline level. So just ask yourself, what are the typical conditions that fish are living in during this time of year, this particular year, and don't go out and do it right after a storm, because that's probably not gonna be what a typical day is for a fish living in that stream. Okay, so I wanted to cover a few stream habitat definitions before I go through the different parameters. And so riffles are shallow areas of your stream with fast, turbulent water running over rocks. This is the babbling brook kind of feature. And they have a pretty clear start and end to them. So the start of the turbulence running over the rocks and the end of the turbulence running over the rocks. And my arrow here, the yellow arrow, is kind of illustrating the length of the riffle in this section of stream. Runs are deeper with fast moving water and little or no turbulence. So the water is just flowing straight through them as shown by the arrow here. And the point of the arrow is stopping at the beginning of a riffle. So where the run ends, the riffle begins. And runs may be straight or they may have a gentle curve. And then pools are deeper areas, the deepest areas of water. The water is slow and calm here. They're often found behind obstructions in the stream and on the outside of bends. It's really hard to take pictures of pools because they are naturally deep. And so this is a picture of kind of the outside of a bend, and you can kind of tell based on that tree growing in the stream and the darker water that is a pool. Pools are definitely easier to experience when you're wading the stream because you step into deeper water. You can also, if the water is really clear, often see the fish hanging out in the bottom of pools, which is pretty cool. And here's another picture of where there's a pool. Again, you can't see that there's a pool there, but we were there in person. It's the outside of a bend. The water very clearly is slowing down, almost like circulating in this area. There's still flow of water through the pool, but it's a much deeper spot. A bend in the stream is a curve where the direction that you're moving changes by at least 60 degrees, and I'll show what that is in a moment. And this is important for us assessing one of our habitat features. So bends are a distinct habitat feature in a stream, like shown here. And just to help you visualize, a 60-degree bend is like the curve of a hexagon. So you can kind of see that on the left. That's if you're walking down the stream in the direction of the arrow and the stream curves by at least that much around that hexagon corner, that's about 60 degrees. And on the right is a shallower curve that we wouldn't consider a bend. It's just kind of a gradual curve in the stream, but it's not turning enough to be considered a bend in the stream. And, you know, when you're out in the stream, you can bring a compass with you to help you see that degree of change, or you can, you know, use your best judgment with your partner, and that's fine too. You don't actually have to measure the degree of change to know that you are in a bend of the stream. And then the last feature, I think this is the last habitat feature I wanted to mention, is a thalweg, which is such a cool word. Thalwegs are the main path of deepest, fastest water. So if you're canoeing, this is the natural path that you will take as you're canoeing. Also, if there's bubbles on the stream, you can kind of follow the bubbles of the stream. So you can see that the thalweg will meander through pools, riffles, runs. And I have this little video I took the other day. It's kind of hard to see, but you can kind of see the bubbles doing a nice curve on the outside of the bend there. And that is the thalweg. So I'll play that one more time so you can kind of see that on the outside of the curve. So next time that you're visiting your stream, see if you can follow the bubble path if there are bubbles. It's easier after riffles to see bubbles in the water. All right. Feel free to stop me if you have any questions so far. I know this is a lot of content we're going through. So you are now prepared to do your habitat assessment. You have a partner, you understand kind of the main features you're looking for, you have your timing down, you know when you're going to go out, and the water levels are just right. So setting up your assessment, We're going to pull out our DNR's qualitative fish habitat form or data sheet. You want to fill in your station name just like you always do in the station ID. That's the main point where you'll be starting your habitat assessment, date and time as well. And then the first thing you do is you measure the width of your stream because you have to understand the generally average width of your stream in order to figure out how long of a length you're going to be assessing. And so let's say we measured our width at our station and it's 12.5 feet wide. What we're going to do is multiply whatever our width is by the number 35, and that is going to give us the length of our habitat assessment. So in this case, 12.5 times 35 is 438 feet. So we are going to do a stream walk upstream or downstream 438 feet, and that will be the habitat we're assessing. For the water level, just indicate normal, below, above, water clarity, clear, turbid, stained. I think those are pretty self-explanatory for wave volunteers. Turbid is full of sediment and algae. Stained is tannins in the water, coloring the water. And then channel condition, natural, straightened, or concrete. Straightened may be an agricultural ditch is a good example. And then concrete is a channel that's probably straight as well, but it's lined with concrete. Now, currently, these channel and basin characteristics are not on the form in SWMS where you enter your habitat data, but I am going to be adding them. It's taking time to work with SWMS staff to get those in there. But the biologist said that this information is useful, so we want to make sure that you're able to submit it. So this is an example again of calculating your habitat assessment length. So your starting stream width is 12.5, multiply that by 35 to get 438 feet. And then what we are doing is assessing each of the habitat parameters, and we're breaking it up into 10 sections, what we call transects. So you're going to take your stream length, 438 feet, you're going to divide that by 10. And so you're going to be assessing each habitat parameter every 44 feet. And this just is helpful to be more fair with the ratings that you're giving to the habitat parameters, because if you're walking 438 feet, it may be hard to summarize what you're seeing. You may think of what you saw most recently and give a rating based on that, but we want to make sure that we're collecting data that's best representing the full 438 feet. And of course, this becomes even more important the longer your stream habitat assessment length is. So if you have 1,000 feet of stream you're assessing for habitat, it's going to be really hard to do that accurately without splitting it up into transects or sections. And the volunteers that I've trained over the past few years using transects have really appreciated having those transects. They found it much easier to be able to be confident in their habitat assessments. So in order to assist with that, I created this transect worksheet, which has the kind of steps for you to follow on one side. And then on the back side is where you're going to be filling in your numbers in each transect. And so let's go ahead and talk about those parameters that we're assessing. The 7 habitat parameters. All right. So number one, first one on our list, riparian buffer width. So what we are looking at is the vegetation on each bank of the stream along our transect. And so if our transect is 44 feet long, we're looking at the riparian buffer on the 44 feet length on the left and on the right. So this is important because having a wide, undisturbed vegetation buffer is going to help prevent erosion, surface water runoff of pollutants like fertilizers, pet waste, sediment, into our stream. So that vegetation soaks up those pollutants and collects that soil and allows water to soak into the ground. Vegetation on the banks and in the floodplain can also slow water during storm events. So there's that friction and they're holding on to the soil. They're slowing the water down a little bit. And of course, having a diversity of habitat on each side of the stream is going to support a healthy and vibrant stream ecosystem. It's going to provide shelter for aquatic animals, and it's going to provide food for wildlife. So it just lets the food web thrive. So to measure our riparian buffer width, what we're going to do is in each transect, we're going to look at the riparian buffer on each side. And if it's not private land, if it's public land, or if you have the permission of the landowner, you can actually measure the buffer. We're looking for the buffer being at least 33 feet wide is excellent on both sides. And so here in this picture, Emily and a volunteer are showing what 33 feet looks like. And so this area that they're in is actually pretty disturbed because it's in a park and there's people trampling around on the bank on either side of this bridge. So there may be trees and plants, but there's soil compaction and there's erosion issues. But I at least wanted to show what 33 feet looked like. And so you're going to say, all right, the buffer on this side is on average in this transect about 20 feet of undisturbed vegetation. And on the other side, it's about 10 feet of undisturbed vegetation. And, you know, this is another example of where you have on one side of the bank, a forest, undisturbed vegetation buffer that you're just going to say that's 33 feet or greater. It's excellent. And on the right side, it's 0 feet of buffer because it's lawn. And so you split the difference and you say, hey, that's on average in this section of stream 15 or 16 feet of buffer. What counts as disturbed buffer? If it's pasture grazed by livestock, that's counted as disturbed. If it's lawn, walking paths, roads, farm fields. So what's not disturbed would be like wetland, prairie, forest, that kind of thing. So that was the first habitat parameter. You walked your 44 feet of your transect, you looked left and right, and you you write down a number for how big you think the buffer is on average in that section. So then you're going to look at bank erosion. So this is important because the condition of your stream bank, like the really terrible erosion in this example, this is an extreme example, it really gives you information about what is happening in the watershed around that stream, the land uses on the stream bank and in the broader watershed in the area, because that is going to affect the stream flow of the conditions the stream is being subjected to. If you have an eroding bank, you're losing plant cover and shading, you know, as that vegetation is lost. You also get erosion. So you have that mud and silt that is flowing into the stream, maybe filling in those nooks and crannies and riffles that macroinvertebrates live and that fish are laying eggs. It's also with more sediment in the stream that results in all kinds of more issues like lower dissolved oxygen levels. And fish it's harder for them to see prey. So lots of trickle down effects, and a reason we don't want severe bank erosion. This also can, of course, if there's structures nearby, begin to threaten buildings and homes. So how do we assess this? As we're walking our transect, we're going to take a few measurements of the height of the soil that is bare. So here's a few examples of bare soil that is eroding away directly into the stream. It's not always going to be as extreme as in that first photo. And so, you know, we have a volunteer here measuring the height of bare soil from the water line up. Same on the right. So from the water line up, how much bare soil that is. And then you're going to with your partner, determine an average height of bare soil for your transect. There are a few scenarios to look for. Here is one where there's a lot of plants on the surface, but underneath the plants, there's a lot of bare soil that's eroding away. So that can be hidden in the summer when the plants are growing. This transect here, or this section of stream, had pretty consistent erosion on both banks of about 1.5 feet. And so that would be my average bank erosion number for this transect. This picture is showing a really healthy stream bank without erosion. There's a lot of vegetation on both banks. This is right after a stream restoration too. So they've done some work on an eroded stream. And so again, similar to riparian buffer, if half the transect has a lot of erosion and half has none, you're going to split the difference, and you're just going to have to work with your partner on coming up with a number that feels right. So I know this can be tricky, and this is why we consider this more of a qualitative type habitat assessment. All right, so the third parameter, pool area, percent in pools. So the picture on the right is showing a fisherman catching a fish in a nice deep pool that is following a riffle. You can see that clear deep water there. And this is important. Pools are important habitat for fish. So fish rest in pools, they're refuges. Macroinvertebrates, some macroinvertebrates also prefer the slow water that's in pools, like snails, crayfish, for example. Also, organic matter flowing through the stream can settle out in pools and provide food for those creatures. And it's just a note, though, it's important for pools to be common, but not to dominate a stream. So we really want a diversity of riffle, run, pool, habitat for different aquatic life. They all have different things that they're providing to aquatic life. And so how do we assess this? So for each transect, our 44 feet that we're walking in this example, you are going to identify what is run, riffle, or pool. So, and then you're going to estimate the percent of the transect that was pools. So in this case, let's say we're walking downstream here, the yellow box, that's a run. And so that's about 75% of my 44-foot transect. The orange box is a short riffle. So I'm going to call that about 10% of the transect. And then finally, you can't tell, but I know from this spot that red box at the top is a pool, a really deep pool on the outside of a bend. And my transect ends there. And so I'm going to say that pool is about 15% of our transect. And so for this part of the stream, I'm going to say pools were 15% of the stream. So that's pool area. And you do that for your every transect. Okay, width to depth ratio. Why is this important? For this parameter, we are characterizing the stream as more of a deep, narrow stream and likely colder water because it's deep. Versus a wide, shallow stream, which is likely going to be warmer. And land use activities can result in the channelization or straightening of a stream, and that can result in much more powerful flows as well that further erode the stream and widen it. They erode and widen it, which one disconnects the stream from its floodplain, but two, it can also result in warmer water and more sediment flowing in the stream. So pictured here is what I'd consider disturbed riparian habitat. It looks like it's grazed habitat. It's not mowed lawn as far as I can tell. And the stream, it looks like there's some erosion happening on the outside of those bends and channelization that's cutting down into the stream. And so the stream is no longer connected to its broader floodplain. This is kind of what I'm seeing from this picture. And so width to depth ratio is kind of going to assess that. So how do we do that? In every transect, we measure and determine about an average width of the stream. And then we're going to take a few depth measurements along the thalweg, which, if you remember, is the deepest path of the stream. And we're going to take a few depth measurements along that thalweg as you walk your transect and determine basically an average thalweg depth for that section of stream. So that will be your ratio. And this stream is, you know, fairly wide, and based on her depth reading there, it looks like, I don't know, 1.5 foot deep thalweg on average. So it's not going to be quite as good of a width to depth ratio. This stream has had a lot of erosion issues, so it probably is being widening and becoming a little more shallow as time goes on due to that erosion. Okay, so number 5, we got 3 more. Fine sediments. So why is this important? We're assessing the percent of fine sediments in our stream bottom because I guess I want to start by saying that streams will vary from being kind of those high gradient or steep rocky bottom streams. So they're flowing faster, there's more riffles in them, there's more turbulent water. And those are great because they provide high oxygen environments for macroinvertebrates, and for fish that need kind of those higher oxygen environments too, like trout. It's also, there are also lower gradient streams. So these don't have as steep of an elevation. They're slower. They tend to be more soft bottom, so silty or sandy bottom streams naturally. They have, you know, no or few riffles, less turbulence. They tend to be very bendy and windy through wetlands. So there are naturally different types of streams with different percentages of fine sediments that make up the stream bed, and so they're going to be appropriate for different aquatic life. So when we get concerned is when we have those healthy rocky bottom stream habitats that are filling in with erosion with fine sediments from stormwater runoff or erosion off fields. And that is going to fill in those gaps in habitat spaces where fish are laying eggs and macroinvertebrates are living and hiding, like our stoneflies and our caddisflies and mayflies. So we want to protect those nice habitat spaces in our rocky bottom streams. So how to assess this? In your 44-foot transect, you'll walk it with your partner, and you're going to look at the stream bottom and determine on average the percent of that stream bottom made up of fine sediments, sand, silt, or clay. So, and the picture in the right is one part of the stream we were assessing the other week. And you can see that there are rocks on the stream bottom, but there's a ton of those fine silty sediments filling in the spaces in between the rocks and smothering that habitat. And so, you know, this is loosely related to the idea of embeddedness. But I liked this illustration because it kind of showed like, okay, you might say a stream has 25% fine sediments if the rocks are pretty much showing up, like they're on top of any sediment. There's just not a lot of sediment there. Versus, you know, if the rocks are kind of half covered, that might be about 50%. And if they're almost entirely covered, which is, it's getting to be that way in this picture, that's going to be 75% fine sediments or more. So in this picture here, I'd probably say, I can't remember what we said in the moment, but I think it was somewhere around 80%-ish. And again, you're working with your partner to make that qualitative decision. Okay, number 6, cover for fish. Now, I don't have why this is important slide because I think this one is pretty self-explanatory. Fish need places to hide, to rest, to hunt for prey. And what they need are places in aquatic plants, under tree snags in the water, under undercut banks or lunker structures, behind boulders, where the water is at least 8 inches deep or 0.7 feet deep. And that's a water depth that's good for our larger, more game fish. So of course, smaller minnows can hide in smaller or in shallower water depths. But for our habitat assessment, this is the depth we're looking for. So as you're walking your transect, what you do is you look for these places that fish could hide and you measure the water depth. And if it's at least 8 inches, you consider that to be fish cover. And then once you've reached the end of your 44 feet, you look back and you say, well, if I was going to draw a rectangle on top of my stream that I just walked, what percentage of that rectangle would be shaded in? And what percent of fish cover is that? Fish don't need 100% cover. I think excellent is 15% of the stream provides fish cover, so it doesn't take a lot. There just needs to be different spots for them to take refuge in. And this is the last one. So riffle, riffle, or bend to bend. So this is important because it's important to have diverse habitats in streams. Riffles, bends, and pools, again, and a nice bendy stream provides a lot of different habitats for fish and macroinvertebrates to hide in and to hunt in. And so it's important to create those habitats. A stream needs to be allowed to naturally meander. And because this process is increasing the distance that water has to flow, it also tends to slow down the water velocity a little bit, which can help prevent erosion and other issues. So how do we assess riffle, riffle, or bend to bend? So, and I have in each transect, this is actually the only one, which is why I save it for last, the only one which you don't do by transects. You're gonna walk basically back to your starting point, your entire stream, and you're either gonna measure the distance between riffles or the distance between bends. So if you have a fast flowing, more turbulent, high gradient stream that has riffles, you are only going to be measuring between riffles. If, on the other hand, your stream doesn't really have much in the way of riffles, then maybe it's a slower, more meandering stream, or it's a ditch that doesn't have riffles. You're going to be measuring between bends on the way back to your starting point. So the purple arrows here on this image, you can kind of see purple arrows. That is measuring between riffles. So you're not including riffles in your measurement, you're measuring between the riffles, and you're just writing down what that distance is. Maybe it's 80 feet between riffles. So you might have to crab walk with your partner in order to measure the distance between riffles. You almost certainly will. If you're measuring between bends instead, you're going to measure from the middle of one bend to the middle of the next bend. And this is where, I mentioned before, a bend is a change in direction of the stream by about 60 degrees or more. So you're not measuring every curve, you're only measuring bends. So the stream has to turn enough that it's worth considering it a bend. And the more a stream bends and meanders, the more likely it is it's going to be creating some of those great habitat features we're looking for. Okay, so almost done here, and then I'll open it up for any final questions. Final scoring and submitting your data. So what we're gonna do basically on our habitat transect worksheet, we have assessed our 10 transects. In this example here on the left, all I filled in are riparian buffer width because I didn't want it to be overwhelming with numbers on the screen. So I've come up with kind of an average width of my vegetation buffer on each side of the stream for my 10 transects. And then I add those up, divide by 10, and I get an average buffer width for my entire stream reach of 21.3 feet. So it's nice to kind of have that number to go by. And it ranged, some of my transects had a 33 feet or greater buffer. Some of my transects had a 15-foot buffer. It kind of varied. And so then I look on the right and I say, okay, riparian buffer width. Then I look for that number, 21.3 feet. That fits into my good rating. The riparian zone is protected, but the buffer width is moderate from 16 to 33 feet. And so since my number falls in there and that describes my buffer width well, I'm going to circle that and give my stream a rating of 10. And I'm going to write that down. So you're going to do this for each of your parameters with your partner once you're done, and then you add those up and you have your final rating. To submit the data, you go into SWIMS just as if you're submitting baseline data. It's actually just one of the last pages on the WAV form in SWIMS. So just as usual, you're going to add your data collectors, who you went out with, your station ID, the start date, time, all of that. Two things on this page. One is it's very important to provide detailed fieldwork comments. So you want to indicate whether you assessed upstream of your station ID, your typical point, or whether you did your assessment downstream. You want to describe what you saw from the different habitat features. Anything that would be useful for the biologist to understand beyond the numbers what you found. And then they also encourage us to include a photo. If you had to take one photo that represents your stream, take that photo and upload it to SWIMS. And so you use this, what I have circled here is the create a document button to upload a photo to your fieldwork event. And I'm not gonna provide details on how to do that here, but you can let us know if you need help doing that. And then this is what the page looks like. You click through your weather page, your stream flow page, the biotic index page, and then you'll get to this page that says qual fish hab less 10, where that's 10 meters, less than 10 meters or less than 33 feet. That is what the form is called in SWIMS. I know it's not the most clear information, but I'll try to clarify that with the SWIM staff if I can. And all you're doing is you're entering your final rating for each of your scores. So that transect worksheet enabled you to have a really thorough habitat assessment so that you could get these final ratings for each of your habitat parameters. And it SWIMS auto-calculates your final score. So that's what you're seeing here. And then click save and return and you're all done. Okay, so we have 10 minutes left. That was a ton of information. I'm gonna stop talking, and if you want to unmute, ask questions, type in comments, I'm happy to hear what you have to say and answer any questions. Thanks. And I'm gonna stop the recording as well.